I, Vorak of the 6th Dominion Scout Fleet, have filed exactly 43 mission reports in my career. 43. Each one was boring. Each one was precise. Each one put my superiors to sleep within the first paragraph, and I considered that a professional achievement. This report will not be boring. I want to make that very clear before I begin. What follows is not exaggeration. It is not the result of oxygen deprivation or stress-induced hallucination. It is the documented, verified, and deeply humiliating account of what happened when our invasion fleet touched down on the third planet of the Sol system. The planet the locals call Earth. We had been watching it for 11 of their years, 11 years of surveillance drones, 11 years of atmospheric sampling, population density mapping, military capability assessment, and behavioral pattern analysis. Our lead strategist, Commander Draxis, had personally overseen the entire operation. He had given a speech. There were refreshments. The invasion was described as, and I quote, "the most thoroughly prepared planetary acquisition in Dominion history." I want you to remember he said that. It matters later. Our fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at precisely 0300 hours, local Earth time. The planet hung below us like a blue marble, quietly spinning, completely unaware. Commander Draxis stood at the front viewport with his 4 arms folded behind him, and he said, "Gentlemen, this will be textbook. 12 landing pods, 400 soldiers, and the most advanced ground warfare technology the 6th Dominion had ever produced. We landed in something called a national park. Our surveillance maps had identified it as low population, low military presence terrain, dense vegetation, minimal infrastructure, an ideal staging ground, and yes, technically all of that was accurate. What our 11 years of surveillance had apparently failed to adequately communicate was what lived inside that dense vegetation. Pod 7 touched down first. I was aboard Pod 3, so I received their transmissions in real time. The first one was standard. Landing confirmed, ground is soft, humidity is high, proceeding to establish perimeter. The second transmission came 40 seconds later. It was not standard. Something is watching us. Then a pause. Then much louder. Something is watching us from the tree. Then screaming. Then static. Commander Draxis pulled up the external feed from Pod 7. On the screen I watched 6 of our finest soldiers sprint back toward their landing pod at a speed I had never seen from trained military personnel. Behind them, sitting on a low branch and staring with an expression of casual, ancient judgment, was an animal the database identified as a brown bear. It had not moved. It had not chased them. It was simply sitting there being enormous, and our soldiers had apparently decided that was enough. "They are afraid of local fauna," Commander Draxis said. His voice was very quiet. "To be fair," said Lieutenant Pren, who was standing next to me, "it is quite large. It is not doing anything. It is doing the thing where it looks like it is considering doing something. That is arguably worse." Commander Draxis told us all to stop talking. He ordered Pod 7's soldiers to hold their position, and reminded them that they were representing the 6th Dominion. They held their position. The bear sat on the branch. 11 minutes passed. Then the bear dropped from the branch, walked past the soldiers at a distance of approximately 4 body lengths, sniffed one of our landing pods, and wandered into the trees. Our soldiers did not move for another 6 minutes after it was gone. I noted in my preliminary log that morale was experiencing adjustment. Pod 3 landed 20 minutes later, on a ridge overlooking a wide, open meadow. I stepped out into the earth air, which was wet and thick and smelled like something I could not identify, and I immediately saw movement in the meadow below. "Contact," said Specialist Pharaoh, raising his weapon. "Wait," I said. They were deer. A group of about 14 deer, grazing in the early morning fog, completely unbothered by the sound of our landing. I had seen deer in the database files. Long legs, brown coats, wide, blinking eyes. What the database files had not mentioned was the one standing at the edge of the group, the one that did not run when we appeared on the ridge, the one that turned its head and looked directly at us with those wide, blinking eyes and then simply did not move. "Why is it not running?" Pharaoh said. "Animals run from perceived threats," I said. "It likely does not perceive us as threats. We have pulse weapons. It does not know what pulse weapons are. Should we explain?" I told him that was not standard invasion protocol. We watched the deer. The deer watched us. This lasted for almost 3 minutes, and I am not too proud to admit that there was something deeply unsettling about being stared at by a creature that showed no fear whatsoever. "Fear is understandable," Fear means the animal knows you are dangerous. No, fear meant something else entirely. It meant the animal was making its own assessment, and it had not yet decided we were worth worrying about. Eventually the deer looked away as if it had concluded we were mildly interesting but ultimately beneath its concern, and went back to grazing. I stood on the ridge for a moment and then turned to find my entire squad staring at me, waiting for orders. "We move to the rally point," I said. "Stay alert." We moved through the forest for approximately 2 kilometers without incident. The planet was loud in a way our audio files had not prepared us for. Things rustled. Things called out from places we could not see. Once, something screamed from very far away, and Pharaoh asked me what it was, and I checked the database, and the database said it was a fox. A fox! Making a sound like a dying signal flare. Casual. Natural. Just a routine activity. At 0500 hours, our 16 squad relay reported in. The count was as follows. 3 squads had retreated from their landing zones due to encounters with local wildlife. 1 squad had completely lost track of 2 members who had climbed back into their landing pod and sealed the door. 1 squad reported that their perimeter sensors had picked up something moving very slowly and very deliberately toward them for the past hour, which turned out, upon investigation, to be a tortoise. Commander Draxis's voice on the command channel was the voice of a being trying very hard to remain calm. "These are animals," he said. "They do not have weapons. They do not have tactics. They are operating entirely on instinct." "With respect, sir," said Captain Wallo from Pod 11, "the one following my squad does not appear to be operating on instinct. It appears to be operating on something closer to strategy." "What is following your squad, Captain?" A pause. "The database says it is called a coyote." Another pause. Commander Draxis asked if the coyote was armed. "No, sir, but it has been maintaining a consistent distance of 30 meters behind us for the past 40 minutes, and every time we stop it stops, and every time we change direction it changes direction, and twice now it has circled around to appear in front of us." Silence on the command channel. "It is hurting you," said Lieutenant Pren in a very small voice. No one responded to that. I think no one wanted to acknowledge it. Because if the coyote was hurting them, that raised a question none of us were prepared to answer. Hurting them where? And hurting them why? At 0522 hours, Pod 9 reported contact with humans. Not military, not armed. 1 human approximately 40 of their years in age, wearing boots and a heavy jacket, standing at the edge of a trail with a cup of something hot and steaming, watching Pod 9's squad emerge from the tree line with pulse weapons drawn. The human looked at the squad. The squad looked at the human. The human said something in their language. The translation matrix processed it after a short delay. "You boys lost?" And that, colleagues, is where I ended my preliminary log and opened a new file, because I understood in that moment, standing in a forest that was watching us, on a planet that had not bothered to panic at our arrival, that we had made some kind of terrible miscalculation. I just did not yet know how large. I want to be precise about the moment everything collapsed. It was not when the bear returned. It was not when we discovered that coyotes apparently communicate with each other across distances, and that the one hurting Captain Wallo's squad had been in fact coordinating with 3 others we had not detected. It was not even when Pod 9's soldiers spent 11 minutes trying to explain to one unarmed human in a jacket that they were an invading force, and the human repeatedly responded with the phrase, "uh-huh," while sipping his drink. The moment everything collapsed was when Commander Draxis gave the order to advance toward the nearest human settlement, and we walked directly into what the locals call a cattle ranch. I will explain what cattle are. Cattle are large, very large, larger than the database photographs communicated, because photographs lack the ability to convey the specific feeling of standing 3 meters away from an animal that weighs more than our standard assault vehicle and is looking at you the same way a wall looks at you, with complete, total, absolute indifference to your existence. There were hundreds of them, and behind them, on a large animal that the database identified as a horse, sat a human woman who appeared to be approximately 50 years old, wearing a wide hat, holding a rope, and staring at our 16-soldier formation with an expression I can only describe as tired irritation. She said something. The translation matrix gave us, "What in the Sam Hill?" Commander Draxis, to his credit, stepped forward. He activated the external vocalization unit on his armor and addressed her in translated Earth language. "Citizen of Earth, your planet is now under the authority of the 6th Dominion. You will lower any weapons and submit to processing." The woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the 16 soldiers behind him. Then she looked back at him. "Son," she said, "I have got 400 head of cattle that need moving by noon. a fence on the east pasture that is not going to fix itself, and 2 ranch hands who called in sick today. So whatever you are selling, I am not buying it." She turned her horse and began moving the cattle. Commander Draxis stood in the field and watched her go. The cattle moved around our soldiers like water around rocks. One of them stopped directly in front of Pharaoh and breathed on him. Pharaoh did not move. I think he was afraid that if he moved he would have to acknowledge the situation he was in. "Sir," I said quietly to Commander Draxis. "She is not going to submit." I noticed that. She did not appear afraid. I noticed that as well. She appeared annoyed. "Vorak," he said, in the tone of a commander who was very close to the edge of something. "I am aware of what she appeared. I was standing here." We retreated to a tree line to regroup. This was when the full relay reports came in from all 16 squads, and I want to read you the highlights because I think they are important for the Dominion Council's understanding of what we faced. Pod 2 reported that their advance had been stopped by what the database called a moose. One moose, standing in a river crossing. Not aggressive, not retreating, simply standing in the only viable crossing point, existing, daring the universe to make it move. Pod 2 waited 90 minutes. The moose did not move. Pod 2 went around. Pod 5 reported a swarm of insects that their armor could not seal out quickly enough. The database called them mosquitoes, tiny, individually meaningless, several thousand of them operating as a unified cloud of misery that had reduced a squad of elite soldiers to slapping themselves and walking in circles. 2 soldiers had mild allergic reactions. One had somehow gotten 17 bites on the inside of his left ear and was no longer able to concentrate on anything else. Pod 8 reported they had found a human child, approximately 8 years old, alone in a clearing, building something out of sticks. They had approached with weapons visible, intending to question the child about settlement locations. The child had looked up at them, declared that one of them looked like a frog, asked if any of them wanted to help build the fort, and then, when they did not respond, told them they were being weird and went back to building. Pod 8's squad leader noted in his report that the child had shown, and I am quoting directly, "zero survival instinct and maximum confidence," and that the squad had quietly left without completing the questioning because, and again I am quoting, "it felt wrong to interrogate someone who had just called Specialist Dunvar a frog." Dunvar, for the record, did not dispute the assessment. Pod 12 had the worst report. They had entered what the database identified as a small town, 40 or 50 buildings, a main road, a place called a diner. They had walked down the main road in full armor with weapons drawn, announcing the planetary acquisition through their translation units. The town had mostly ignored them. One elderly human had come out of a building to take a photograph with a small device. A group of younger humans had asked to take a photograph with the soldiers, and when the soldiers said no, they had seemed genuinely more disappointed than frightened. Someone had put a sign in a window that said "Alien Special, 2 for 1 coffee," and there had been a crowd inside pointing and talking excitedly. No one had screamed. No one had run. One human had shouted from an upper window asking if the invasion was going to take long because he had a thing at 3 o'clock. Commander Draxis finished reading the reports without speaking. He sat down on a log. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "They are not afraid of us." "No, sir, not even slightly." The child called Dunvar a frog. I read that. He put his head in 2 of his hands. 11 years, Vorak. 11 years of preparation. We analyzed their military. We analyzed their weapons. We analyzed their population density and their political structures and their industrial output. Yes, sir. We did not analyze their disposition. There was a long pause between us. Birds were calling somewhere in the trees above. Something in the distance let out a low, rumbling sound that the database said was thunder but which I personally suspected was the planet itself making a comment. "Sir," I said carefully, "I think the issue is that this species has spent its entire history on a planet that was actively trying to eliminate it. Geological events, temperature extremes, predators larger and faster than anything they had, disease, and they survived all of it. So when we arrived, we were simply the next thing on the list." He looked at me. "We are an interstellar invasion fleet. Yes, we have weapons capable of leveling mountain ranges. Yes, and we are being herded by coyotes and ignored by cattle ranchers. Correct?" He stood up slowly. He looked at the sky for a moment, then at the trees, then at the field where the cattle rancher had gone back to her work as if we had never existed. "Recall all units," he said. "We are returning to the fleet. Sir, the council will need a reason." "Give them one?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, I will note in the report that we encountered unexpected environmental and biological resistance across all landing zones, and that further assessment is required before ground operations can be considered viable. He nodded slowly. That is diplomatic. It is accurate, sir. The environment did resist us. Enthusiastically, we began the walk back to the landing pods. Around us, the forest continued its noise. Something rustled close by. Something called from above. Pharaoh was still twitching slightly from the mosquito encounter. Dunvar had gone very quiet, the way beings go quiet when they have been told they look like an amphibian and cannot stop thinking about it. At the landing pods, we found the cattle rancher waiting. She was sitting on her horse at the edge of the clearing, watching us load up. She had the rope coiled in one hand and the hot drink in the other, and she watched us with the patience of someone who had waited for things before and was entirely comfortable doing it again. Commander Draxis stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. Leaving already? She said. We are conducting further analysis, he said. She nodded slowly. This planet presents certain complications we did not anticipate. She took a slow sip. You came all the way out here and a few cows gave you trouble. Draxis said nothing. And a bear, from what I can see on that one fellow's face. She nodded toward Pharaoh. Pharaoh said nothing. She looked at us for one more moment, then turned her horse around. Well, she said without looking back, you are welcome back any time, long as you behave. And she rode away. We lifted off at 0847 hours. The planet shrank beneath us, blue and green and completely unbothered. Commander Draxis stood at the viewport and did not speak for a very long time. Finally, Lieutenant Pren said quietly, Sir, should we flag this planet as a threat in the navigation database? Draxis thought about it. Flag it as complicated, he said. I wrote my report on the return journey, all 44 pages of it. I included the bear, I included the coyote, I included the child and the cattle and the man with the coffee and the woman on the horse who had sent an interstellar invasion fleet home with nothing but patience and mild irritation. At the top of the document where mission outcome is typically recorded, I wrote the following. Planet Earth, attempted acquisition unsuccessful. Species shows no recognized fear response to military presence. Local fauna operationally disruptive. Human population psychologically resistant to intimidation by default. Recommend indefinite postponement of all future operations. Recommend flagging this system with the following notation for all future Dominion commanders. I paused. Then I wrote, they have been through worse. They will be fine. We, on the other hand, may need a moment. I submitted the report. The Dominion Council responded 3 weeks later with a single line. Report received. Planet Earth reclassified. Do not return. Somewhere below us, a cattle rancher fixed her east pasture fence. A child finished building a fort. A coyote watched something from a ridge, and a bear sat on a branch, completely unbothered, judging the universe, as it always had, as it always would.